this is Jim Horn with another black and white photography vlogcast. And today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to welcome Melanie McWhorter. She is a photo book publishing consultant specialist. Let me give you a little bit of her resume and you'll understand what I mean. She's been consulting with photographers for 2 decades. She managed the Photo Eye bookstore, and in addition, she's done book reviews, The Art of Rune, Gardening at Night, When I Was Six, Photo Book, A History, Volume 3 with Martin Parr and Gary Badger. Martin is a well-known photographer. Touching Strangers, Indie Publishing, The Course of History, Rainbow Transit, and photographs. And she recently taught a class where I took because I felt I needed to get up to speed on book publishing at Santa Fe Workshop. And hopefully you will be teaching that class sometime again, because
yes.
I think you are.
Yes, I am. They invited me to teach again. So in the spring,
good.
February, March, April, I'm not sure. So you can sign up for the Santa Fe Workshops newsletter to find out about it.
Okay, well, I'll have your, when we put this on YouTube and Facebook, I'll have all of your information as far as your website. Is that the best address to use, or do you want to use Instagram?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to let everybody know. And my Instagram, you can put that up there as well too.
Okay. Well, this vlogcast goes worldwide, so maybe you'll have some out-of-country visitors. You never know, Melanie.
There's some great photo books all around the world.
Yes, indeed. Anyway, I've always been interested in book publishing, let me just go back a little bit. I've always been interested in projects. I think today we've got the Instagram mentality, and what is happening is everybody takes that one picture, they post it on Instagram, and they wait for everybody to give them a big heart salute and so forth. And really, photography is a lot more than that. Photography is about taking that collection that you've worked on of those photographs, 15, 20, 25 photographs, and putting them in a book. And I don't necessarily recommend blurb. I mean, blurb is good starting out, but I think from what I've seen, I get the Photo Eye not subscription, but the emails, and that's a good place to go. A lot of photographers think, well, this is not a good project. You know, it's not. No, you'll see all sorts of things. So I asked Melanie to come on, and let's talk about book publishing. You know, how it needs to get done and how you need to get started. And as I said, we're not really talking about blurb. We're talking about the step 1, step 2, and then, you know, thinking about where you go from there. And that's where somebody like Melanie fits in to help you design your book. So Melanie, let's say I'm a photographer, sort of. Well, and I'm a photographer, and I've got 40 pictures, I'm working on a project now up in Hayden, Arizona. So let's just use that. I've got 40 pictures of this old copper town, and I want to do a book. And I've tried working with the blurb software, and I have tried working with the blurb software. It isn't really easy. Dan Milner is probably going to hear this video and probably kill me. But so what do I do? Where do I start? How do I make that first connection to get that book going? What's your recommendation?
Well, there's a variety of things that you could do. One big thing that I usually, when people come to me, I usually have a wealth of questions for them, unless they've really thought through this already. The big thing, and this kind of is a recurring thing that occurred on a lot of talks and has also popped up on a lot of occasions and during the workshop, is just kind of asking yourself, why do you want this book? And I think that's a good thing to explore, is to think about the reasons why you want it. And then the second thing that you want to think about is who the audience is for this and how broad that audience is. So and if you kind of explore some of those ideas and then you still feel like it's going to be a really good book, then you could go into a wide variety of steps probably with that as well, like thinking about editing, you know, you printing out some cheap prints and editing those. And like Matt Schallenberger, who we had come in for the workshop, he had talked about using just existing books, which was absolutely brilliant. And I'd never thought about that before. I've thought about with journals, but like using existing books, put them in the books and see how they feel, see what these images communicate in a book form, because essentially kind of coming from single images or even a group laid out or tacked up on a wall, they communicate something totally different. And what do you want to say with the book? You know, what do
So one of the ways it seemed to me that was a good way to organize, they did little prints, didn't they? In other words,
yes.
and how and so what's the process there to, as far as, you know, you make the little prints, or do you, how do you you know, what's the best way? Just print them on any kind of printer and
Any kind of thing, just so you can
okay,
kind of get a good feel for the images. Because I
okay,
think it's more about like editing and sequencing initially. It's not about the quality of the prints that you're actually producing, even though
okay.
you know want to consider that later on. It's about just kind of seeing what your edit says about what this project is, and if it does truly say that. And like using yours as one example, there were a wide variety of ways that we could look at some of these historic images. And once you started blending in some of the archival and historic images, then it became a totally different beast. So it
Uh-huh.
wasn't just kind of a documentary, contemporary documentary project. It became something totally different.
Okay.
So what kind of ephemera would you actually include in that too?
Well, one of the things that I found the most difficult, and I know you sent us a couple articles on it, was editing and sequencing.
Mhm.
Uh, that seems to be a talent all into itself. Uh,
And there
what?
could be hybrids for that too. There could be different approaches. You could do it chronologically. You could do it. I love the flow of a play of light and color and and I apologize about my beeps. I think that's me. A play of light and color, a play of shapes, a play of themes. So there could be themes that kind of tie in with each other. There could also be, it could be a narrative. You're trying to tell a story. It could be divided according to chapters. Like there's some books that I have with the Overlaps publisher, and they use little stories to introduce the pictures. So it becomes about a mood sometimes too. Like when we interviewed one of the photographers, his was based pretty heavily in kind of film noir. So he almost told a story, but also tried to create a relationship. And I think of it like a dialogue between the images. And also the other terms that I use kind of are cadence, kind of like how is the spacing, what's the flow. And I use the Samargo novel, Blindness, I think is the name of the novel, as an example because he has no periods in there. And you don't realize it until you're almost, you know, most, or I didn't until I was somewhat of the way through. There's no punctuation to stop you. You just kind of flow and you all of it, you get a good anxious feeling with it. So what do you want to communicate with the book object itself, and how can the photos and the editing and sequencing of that translate what you're trying to say?
I think one of the things that I do remember is that you really steered us toward looking at other books, other photo books.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
do you find, you know, looking at other photo books? I mean, I know I bought Dreamland at your recommendation to take a look at that to see how he laid out the book. But um, do you look for a book that you think might identify with what you're trying to do, the photographer or the guy that, or the person that's working on the photo book, or uh, where, what do you buy photo books, or do you go to the library? I'm not sure, because that could get a little expensive.
Oh yeah, they're pretty pricey. Yeah, photo books are pretty pricey. There's I mean, it'd be great if you could buy some of them, of course, and support some of your other photographers too, because that's ideally the reason why people produce them. But there are a lot of vehicles. I even sent you guys a lot of videos on Vimeo and YouTube, and there's different people who will actually do that, and even a photo eye has a virtual flip through where you can look through them that are static images. But then places like Photo Bookstore UK, I think they actually do a lot of videos. So you
Is
can
that,
kind
you
of,
said Photo Books UK?
Photo Bookstore UK, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And maybe some other ones like another bookstore, Dashwood Books. I think they may do some videos. So it's almost like anything you're doing, you have to dig in and do some of your research and find good resources where you can actually investigate some of these. But some of just the basic video sites like YouTube and Vimeo are really good resources.
Okay. Okay. So, and then of course you can buy the books, as you said, and support the photographers, because this is really not a money making kind of thing, is it?
It,
Or,
it can it can be, but it's rare that that happens. And a
okay.
lot of photographers do not pay themselves for their work. This becomes quite an expensive marketing tool for a lot of artists. Or the way that I like to think of it a lot of times too is it becomes a different art object. So you're kind of collaborating with another artist, maybe say the designer or the publisher, who somewhat can be the designer publisher. You create a whole entire new object out of
Okay.
out of your out of your photography.
Okay. So, a photographer, he does the small photos. I think I put mine in a sketchbook, one of those large sketchbooks that are fairly inexpensive, to just see how it flowed and so forth. Uh, but once they get to that stage, and they don't want to go to blurb, for example, they want to, they see something, they want to use it for a marketing tool, like some of those, like you mentioned, and so forth. What's really their next step? Is it really to come to somebody like you to work on the layout? Would that be the next step?
You could. I mean, I have a very specific aesthetic too. So just like with if you were researching publishers, you would want to find the publisher who fits in with your work. Um, but if you're going to work with a consultant or a designer, I would really take a look at the website and maybe some of the books that they've done in the past and make sure that it's exactly what you're looking for. As there's other consultants, Mary Virginia Swanson does a lot of marketing stuff. There's a woman named Joanna Hurley who does a lot of packaging, and there's a variety of other consultants too whose aesthetics are vastly different than mine. So mine's going to be a little more contemporary and a little more contemporary, a little less safe. And that's usually how I like the book objects too. I like a transformation of the work. So if we're going to kind of work together, then I'm going to try to investigate what you want to do in the first place. Like, what are some of your goals with this actual object as it ends up being? And have you done some research with different publishers? And what kind of object do you want to actually end up with? And most of the time, if you're going to go a more traditional route, like a kind of a more coffee table book, hardbound, kind of one after the other, then I may not be your person. But I can always probably, usually, if you've got a good, strong body of work that resonates with me, then I can work with you and we can kind of get it to a point where we could jump it off to someone else if we need to as well.
And where do a lot of when they're starting this project or thinking about stuff, where do they fail? What are some of the steps that they miss? You know,
Well, I think if you are photographers a lot of times will create an isolation too. So I think that if you can find some sort of broader community, and now with all the virtual platforms, there's a lot of ways that you could do that. So
okay,
some people I think who are creating things in isolation and they dig into a project and they think they have the project, like they do a 5-year project on I don't know, a specific geographic location, and they continue to go back, but then they don't get a lot of feedback. And then at the end, they present this project, and if we could have backtracked and started with you in the beginning, then I probably would have told you to go a whole entire different route. So I think it's just kind of exploring, getting feedback from some people who have some knowledge, not just like your mom and your sister. And, I talk to my
Yeah.
neighbor and they think it's great. And
Yeah.
that's fine. If your mom and your sister and your neighbor are going to buy those prints or those books, then that's the audience then you want to talk to. But if you're going to go to a much broader kind of fine art market, I would do some research. And now, just like we talked about in the class, with the pandemic, you can do portfolio reviews online, and just kind of to experience one of those is, I think is just a great thing for a photographer to do. To kind
Would
of get,
the portfolio review? I know they have a big one out in California, don't they? That's a is it
there's a
Palm
few
Springs?
of,
Yeah,
yeah. There's
that's the
one.
one I've heard about.
Yeah, there's a few of them that are going on. There's one that I'm going to be part of at LA Center for Photography in January, but there's a good many of them that are that are out there now, and probably even more of them might be popping up. Um,
Is that a good way to start? Let's say you've got the 40 pictures that I talked about before, and you want to do a virtual portfolio review, like you're talking about here. Is that a good way to start with those 40 pictures to see what critics like yourself, whether it's got possibilities or not? Is that a good way to start too?
yeah, it's a good way to reach out to a broader audience and get a variety of opinions on the work, and for a good price. It's like if you paid me versus and then paid two or three other people, if you could actually get in touch with them to pay them, if they even had the time to do something like that, then you would probably spend as much as you would on one of these portfolio reviews now. And I think you may get 8 to 12 reviews, so you kind of get the opinion of a lot of those people, and then just look for commonalities or come up with all the questions that you want to ask and see as many of the questions you can get responses to while you're there.
So you could say to one of the 6 or 7 reviewers, okay, this is the portfolio, and obviously, what do you think of the project? And I'm assuming these are typically projects that are represented in portfolios. Is that correct, or
Yes, yeah, you could come in with something new. Like I've gone to, especially local portfolio reviews. A lot of times there's people with brand new projects who are just breaking into the photo world. And I actually quite love meeting with some of these people because they're totally green and they're open to hearing what you have to say, but they're also kind of exploring. They're getting to know themselves and getting to know their projects. But it's exciting to have something that's absolutely complete and very solid too. But I think portfolio reviews, you can bring in a body of work that's in a wide range of completion, even if it's just starting. But most people come with completed projects.
do you when just thinking about the portfolio review, I think the reason we reach out to our family and friends with either a book project or photographs is probably because we don't want to be critiqued, right? So I would imagine you've got to this is sort of off the top. No, not really. I mean, you've got to sort of overcome the mental hurdle of showing your photographs to, 7 or 8 different people during this portfolio and hoping that everybody is sort of nice to you.
Well, they do, and most portfolio reviews do encourage them to be nice and
Uh-huh.
constructive. And if they're not, I would highly recommend contacting the organizers and just
Okay.
say this person was not as professional as
Uh,
it should have been. And I've witnessed some of those. So you have to kind of just be open to it. And I tell people too, I mean, it's a product and it's a commodity. It's something that you created, it comes from you, but you've kind of got to let it go a little bit and let it live its own life a
uh-huh.
little, like a child, like a baby. You kind of take it personally, but you have to let it be its own thing in some ways
Okay.
and not fully identify. And then if all the feedback's bad, then maybe you take that into consideration. That doesn't necessarily mean that the work is bad. It just means this is not the right audience for it.
Ah, okay.
So it could be that the work is bad, but it could be that the work is excellent, but you just need to find a different audience,
Okay. And
like landscape photographers who have galleries in Jackson, Wyoming and sell really well may not be ones that would, be good for a gallery in LA. So,
okay, yeah, they may be looking for something different. And when the prospective photographer goes to the portfolio, obviously, is that one of the questions they say? Is this a good book project? Is that something that you typically get asked when you're in these reviews?
well, you could. I mean, you
Yeah.
probably want to talk with a more of a book person if you're going to meet with them about it. But
Okay.
but you may want to ask. A lot of times they might be a little more hesitant about referring people, and I'm a little hesitant too, unless I like if I interview a client, because I kind of now I do it more so a little bit of an interview process, and the work, and it has to resonate with me, and then I would hope someone, if I'd say I don't think I can promote this work and kind of and bring it to fruition as a book project, as you want to do it, or as I would see this route going, then it wouldn't be a personal thing, because it has to be something that I believe is suited to what I do. Oh, I lost track of my question there. Maybe
Well, we
we've got
were,
another question. I'll come back.
well, that's okay. We were just talking about, is the photographer, can he ask, do they ask the question, is this a good book project? And I think you said, well, you'd probably refer them, if it wasn't to yourself, obviously, then maybe to somebody else that liked the work, or, something like that, that maybe, it was a little bit too avant-garde, and consequently, wasn't something that you would do, somebody else might do, or something like that.
Yes. Oh, but there's the other thing that relates to that is just audience. So, it may be a book that, and it's incredibly simple, the aesthetically lovely images, then maybe that's a limited edition of 10 copies, and or you have connections, you're a former librarian, you have connections to the special collection system, so maybe you could sell them there, or you have really good connections to, you're doing something that's environmental, you have a nonprofit that'll actually, or an organization, say, maybe an engineering firm, and they'll put in some money, or they'll buy 200 copies of it, so you've automatically sold some of those. So just thinking about who your audience is and what the object should be, and then what your purposes are in doing it. So
Okay.
is it just a marketing piece that's going out there? Maybe it's something smaller and you only do 100, you only do 10, or
When
you
I
do 1,000.
when I've been at Paris Photo, one of the things I was, I'm used to big photo books, I guess, the thick ones, and that kind of thing. And I was surprised there were so many small books, things that didn't have a lot of pages to them. But I don't know if I didn't ask if they were self-published or not. They may or may not have been, but I mean, is there a minimum, you think, on, I talked about 40 images in the beginning. Obviously, you can go up to a lot more images. Is there sort of a sweet spot for the number? Let's say a photographer's got 10 or 15 images. Is that too small, or, and I'm making the assumption it's a good book project. Okay. It stands out, it's different, and so forth and so on. Is there a minimum on this thing, or is it, what are your feelings about that?
I don't necessarily think there's a minimum, but
Okay.
you might not want to go much lower than 10. I don't
Okay.
know if that would be a book project or not. I'm trying to think of other ones if I've seen something that's much smaller than that. Like if you do little zine publications, a lot of times they want a minimum of 8 pages, because that's
Okay.
usually just a sheet signature that pops through and fold down. But if you're making your own, I mean, you could do whatever. You could buck the curve in a Deschamps sort of way, like anytime you might want to do that. But yeah, usually I think it's usually the 40 to 60 ish, 100 to 150 pages ish.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
that kind of book. And do you find that I've got a photographer in New York that's coming on Gerard's coming on. He's got sick. I guess everybody out in the East Coast is. So he's coming out in a couple of weeks. But more importantly, he did a book on Subway, which was a topic that one of the gentlemen had on our Santa Fe
Wow.
workshop.
Yeah.
And apparently he's published a book. I don't know whether he did it self-published or how he did it. He said he sold out sold out 3 times or whatever. But regardless of that, does it get to a point where there's, and the subway might be a good example of that in New York City. I mean, that's been photographed. Is it ever, does it have, how unique does this have to be to, I mean, when you take a look at it, do you say, oh, this is really unique? Or you say, you know what? Well, we had another gal trying to work on the border issues.
Mhm.
And I think you mentioned to her that there's a lot of stuff out there on the border issues. So does she specifically, or anybody, do they have to come back and have something that's really sets it apart from uh, somebody, sets it apart from the other books before you think it's worth putting out there?
Well, ideally, you would be saying something different and contributing to the dialogue. I think there are successful books sometimes that are, how many horse books can you have? Well, a lot. The people love horses, so it's like you can continue to repeat some of those same themes and maybe having a different aesthetic approach. Um, but I think and with the border issues, I don't know if there's necessarily a saturation point for that. There may be, and there may be other things like that too, where there is a saturation point, because I think that some of the people who are really interested in that topic would still buy that book. But I think you'd want it to stand out and want it to be different, because you are going to be compared in a lot of ways by people in the know to what already exists. So I think it's really good to explore what already exists. You may want to, there's I think there's a line between like knowing too much and then knowing too little, especially when you're creating some of these projects, to where you might try and deviate too much where you're not true to your own voice and what you want to say about the work. But I think it's really good to investigate and find out what's already been done. And so with her work, with like Lori's work, for instance, we're just kind of look through and see, it's ideally, it's what she wants to communicate about the work that should stand out first.
Right.
And then we'll kind of figure out from that. And then could it be a book? Is it an over encompassing book, or would it be something that's just on a specific element of the border, for instance, as we're using hers as an example? But yeah, I think you have to say something somewhat different.
Some different, I saw a book. This goes back. It actually was out of Lund's work. And I think it could have been a book. And the guy, I'm assuming yeah, I'm pretty sure he was in Auschwitz. And Auschwitz has been photographed after the war a lot.
Mhm.
And what he did, and he might have done this by accident, but obviously there's a lot of visitors walking around. And he decided to shoot everything at a slow shutter speed. So it looked like there were ghosts walking around Auschwitz. And it was really a technique it stayed in my mind, that I thought, well, wow, that's something different. That's really separated him from the standard photos that you would see, or, the memorabilia and that kind of thing. So I understand what you're saying. It's got to fit what you want to do. And if you really want to get it going, it's got to be a little bit unique too. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and for you to continue to maintain the momentum for a project for, a year, 3 years, 5 years, where you're continuing to promote that, you have to feel passionate about it.
Yeah.
So kind of as you're approaching a project, like I was saying, if you're approaching a project, and I view that a lot of really good projects kind of they seem to develop organically too. So you have that one accidental frame that you shoot and you go, wow, this is it. And that's your jumping off point for the project. So I would say kind of dig in and shoot some and then get a little more feedback, and then shoot some and then get a little more feedback, and kind of see where it's going. And then with a book project too, I think as it's going along, just like with your marketing, I advise people now, because people want the magic bullet with marketing, like how am I supposed to sell out all the books? And you kind of just have to maintain it along the way, and you got to keep that momentum going. So I think if you're doing this book project as it goes along, then just kind of keep checking in on what it actually is. And I think with books, you got to do the same thing. You got to do a little bit of your homework and find out what else is out there. And then do you still want to end up shooting it, or if it's already done, how are you going to repackage this in a different way where it's going to attract a different audience? Because one of the things publishers will want to know if you're working with a publisher is if the market is saturated already on a certain topic.
Yeah. And going back to the passion, and I wonder if this doesn't drive the passion, do the photographs and then the book. Going back to do you know Milner at all? He lives up in Santa Fe.
I do. Dan and I,
okay.
and his wife.
Okay, nice guy, and he's a bright guy, and he's done a lot of photography. And I shouldn't be disparaging about blurb. Sorry, Dan, don't worry about it. But yeah, but he did talk, because he's been a documentary photographer. He's talked about attached and detached projects, and attached projects are projects where you get, and he does a lot of book, by the way. Attached projects are where you get involved with not only what you're shooting, but the people and so forth and so on. And then he talks about detached projects where you're doing the shooting, and you're not really interacting maybe with the community, or there isn't that visceral kind of interaction that can go on. Do you see that in, when people come to you with projects, and, which would eventually relate to a book? Does that come through at all? I mean, that kind of, whether this person's really into this project, or whether it's just sort of a detached, they ran out and did this. And
oh yeah, I think that does come through, and in some book projects too. I think that it most definitely comes through, especially in travel related photography. So you can tell if people, most of the time, you can tell if they've spent some time with the community and or done a good bit of research on the area before they actually went. So there's a sense of familiarity to it, instead of just a sense of, because photographers, I think too, are also, sometimes we can be maligned to where we just kind of as far as a type of medium we take a lot, so and I think you can kind of be cold and be behind the camera. Like, I can doing sports photography for a little while, you look through this square and you're so used to looking at the squares, like with television and things like that, and you pull yourself away from what's actually there by looking through that. And doing football, I can remember a few times just watching, like I'm watching something that actually separates me from the world. And then almost getting nailed by football players, yeah. Tuck down and like almost get tackled. So that you can usually tell. And if you want it to be this, there's also some really strong projects that have a sense of indifference almost to the work, even though you can tell the photographer was very passionate about it, but it's very, it's not dry. It's just, there's a separation and a coldness and clinicalness to it, but then the work still really resonates to a very broad audience. So there's kind of got to be this delicate balance. You've really got to know what you're shooting and know how to shoot. And I think that looking at images, whether you're looking at a lot of books that relate to your topic or just continually looking at images, is a good thing to, like Kerry James Marshall, I saw him speak, the painter, one time, and then he uses a quote, I think that's attributed to Picasso, which I don't know if it's his or not either. But, and he also questioned that, I think, at that time of, to find someone whose work you like and emulate it in your own style. And I think that until you find your own voice and how you want to communicate that is unique. It may be somewhat similar to someone else, but to find your own voice that's unique, then I think it's okay to kind of emulate someone else and to continually look and try and find out how you're going to communicate what you want to communicate. But and then who it resonates with, knowing like who kind of your audience is, because there's a lot of photographers who are shooting great subjects, but they're not producing good photographs. So I think you just got to know how to shoot well, and then know how
Yeah.
to speak the language.
I think of Peter Licks. He sells those things for, the guy over in Las Vegas that sells that stuff for thousands and thousands of dollars. He's uh, he's pretty famous, and some of his photography is a little, I don't know. I don't think they're great photographs. You wouldn't want to put 5 or 10 or 30 or 42 together in a book. And Peter's more commercial anyway. So, but wrapping this up, because I want to encourage everybody that listens to this broadcast to, think about, doing your own book. I mean, um, and we didn't talk about cost, and I think what I gleaned from the class was that cost for to do this can be all over the place. It doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. There are inexpensive book publishers. Um, so it's just a matter, I guess, of getting started, isn't it? And getting the stuff together and getting out there and seeing what who's going to want your stuff or who's going to help you with your stuff.
Yeah, thinking about audience, kind of trying to set up a budget as best you can. And I know we've dealt with a lot of abstracts today too, but I feel like it usually is a lot of abstract because it's such a personal thing. Like producing a photo book of your own work is a very personal thing. And then just thinking about audience and the why and the how, and then who you can partner with, like who's in your network. Are there nonprofits you can work with? Are corporations who might sponsor it? How are you going to get the money, and who are they? And then if you want to do something smaller and with the goal of doing something larger, now maybe you do a series of booklets, or there's so many options on how you go about doing it nowadays.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's very personal, and it's very specific, I think. So it's hard to kind of come up with specific details.
Yeah, and I noticed that when we did we did the when we were in the class, you did have that spreadsheet. The things to think about as far as cost, right? What is this going to cost, and taking a look at it in a very practical way, sort of separating the passion maybe from the practicality of doing it, and,
Mhm.
and what the expense is. Well,
Yeah.
Melanie, I thank you very much.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. Thanks so
I,
much, Jim.
I will have this will be on Facebook, it'll be on YouTube, and then I take the audio part and then put it on Apple, and it goes on Spotify and so forth and so on. And for all of you listeners out there, and this will be a virtual class at Santa Fe Workshop, I would assume. Is that correct?
Yes, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Because I'm not a frontline worker. They're not giving me the vaccine.
well,
So,
for
yeah,
all of you that are listening, and I think the class will usually limit it to about 12 or 13 or 14 people,
it's
something like
12, and
that.
we'll probably keep it with 12 this time too. Uh,
Yeah, and sign up for Melanie's class because there's a lot more in-depth information that she'll provide. She'll coach you on your book project, give you some really good ideas. And I got a lot out of the class, to be very honest. And I didn't miss one. Didn't miss one class.
but
And
you got A plus.
that's right. I got an A plus. So, but it was a great class. And I encourage, if you can get over to whenever they post it. They may not post it till January, but do Melanie's class. And I will have Melanie's information, her web page, and through her web page you can also contact her. And if you've got a book project you'd like to talk over with her, I would certainly suggest you do that. Melanie, I appreciate this opportunity to talk to you, and I'm sure the listeners from all over the world will probably be glad to get some good advice, at least some starting advice as to where they want to go with their book project.
Yeah, I look forward to it, and thank you for your time. It
And
was really good. I really enjoy having you in the class too.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you very much. Hang in there.